In this juicy episode, we go over the origin of birth control and its history so you can understand this fully. Then we dive into what exactly birth control is doing to your body and why birth control periods are not real periods. We discuss why birth control is often prescribed and why it shouldn't be used as a catch-all for women's hormonal imbalances. Learn what you can do to support your body on and off birth control to protect your hormones and preserve your fertility. Let's get started. Welcome to Healthy as a Mother, the podcast for becoming and being a mother, with your co-hosts, Dr. Leah Gordon and Dr. Morgan McDermott, two naturopathic doctors who get it.
Each week, we teach you how to be the healthiest mother you can be, from fertility and preconception to pregnancy and birth prep, through postpartum and throughout motherhood, empowering you with the natural health guidance and education you're not getting elsewhere so you can confidently navigate the broken system at large.
The real, the raw, the untalked about.
So, birth control is one of these topics that is something that you know much more than normal naturopathic or natural health doctors in general because of the way that it affected you, and it has affected so many of your clients. You have a birth control course, you have been on some really other big podcasts about birth control, and I think that it's such a sensitive topic because we're not against the idea of using birth control. We just want women to be informed that when you're going to choose a hormonal birth control, there are things that may happen to your body, and in true informed consent, people need to know about that. And also, it's not the only option. So let's go ahead and talk about some sort of like the overview of birth control as not being a cure-all. What was the history? How did it start? How did we get to the point that we're at right now? And what is your vision for the world in a different sense of how it can be for women to be able to understand their cycles, prevent pregnancies if that's the goal, but also really not be covering up the hormonal issues that may be going on?
Yeah, no, this is such a good point. Just to be clear, we are not anti-birth control, and there is a time and a place for it. And there are many times when it's probably not the best choice. And like you mentioned, informed consent is very important, and just times are different. So if you understand the history of birth control, when we talk about birth control or the pill, typically we are talking about the oral form of birth control, which was the initial invention and push. There are other forms now like shots and IUDs and rings and implants, which many of them I'm not a fan of. But if we just say as a general term, birth control is the pill, is the oral pill. The history of it really started back in the early part of the last century, with a lot of the same women who were pushing for the suffrage movement of women's right to vote. And this was the first wave of feminism. And at the time in New York, Margaret Sanger was one of the biggest pushers of that. And there is some controversy with her around the eugenics movement. I'll get to that in a little bit. But Margaret Sanger was one of the first initiators of really pushing for this, mostly because she was actually very interested in sexual freedom. She was herself a motherless woman. She just loved sex.
Great. Good for her.
Actually, she maybe had one daughter. I correct that. I think she did have one daughter, but she was not a person who was interested in being a mother figure or just like having tons of children.
And she wanted to just be able to have sex and not get pregnant.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I get that.
Yeah, totally. And she was
big deal.
She was very much an independent woman and just had that whole very like classic first wave feminist. And they were just beginning to understand hormones at that time. And it was very primitive in their understanding. They did not understand a female cycle. We did not know exactly how we ovulated or what the hormonal rhythms were that led to pregnancy. But they were doing experiments on mice and eventually humans of trying to figure out what hormones can we give women that would basically stop them getting pregnant. And at the time, especially in New York and some of the lower income areas, women were having 10 to 12 babies. Women were at their wits' end. Many of them were unhealthy. They couldn't afford to feed their children. It was a really big deal. They needed it to stop.
Totally.
And some women were absolutely desperate.
And some of it's partially religion too. They didn't believe in forms of birth control or whatever. And that was like their want, their choice. But there's definitely a lot of women who didn't want to be having those huge families.
Yeah. And it was just, they didn't know how to prevent it. And it was just what it was. So there was a time and a place for it. And it was beautiful at the time in many ways. There were some sketchy things with the birth control movement. Like I said, Margaret Sanger needed to get her movement pushed. And so she really got into like the eugenics movement with people who were very motivated to reduce population size and reduce babies, especially in certain demographics, which is very controversial and not fun. Some of the experimentation they did was in Puerto Rico on very poor women, and lack of informed consent. Obviously the trials, as many pharmaceutical trials go, wasn't very long
or
and very
ethical.
thorough.
And I will say, just a little plug, but actually, if you look back in history, gynecological history, this is a repeated theme over and over again, where sterilizations were being done to African-American slaves, or different things were happening against their will, against their consent. This is how we learned a lot about the modern gynecological history of anything was being done to these populations of people in really horrific, horrible ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is the history of medicine. It's not a conspiracy. This is just the way that it is.
Right.
And I think that it's important for us to know and recognize that, and also so that we don't repeat history, right? And experiment on people. And there are a lot of ethical rules and regulations in place so that these kinds of things don't exist. But we want to just recognize that a lot of what we've learned has been at the hands of people who did not want to be performed on or experimented on. And that is really screwed up.
It is screwed up. And the Planned Parenthood movement started at the same time with Margaret Sanger and the whole birth control movement. And certain groups of feminists and just female advocates are very pro birth control, as for many reasons around it. But I think some of them forget that kind of dark history of it. And some of the other things that we feel are maybe not very pro woman right now, how it's being used. So basically that's the history. At the time, we just didn't have a lot of other options. There wasn't the internet. We weren't able to educate women. We didn't even understand how the cycle works. So cycle tracking and fertility awareness and those kind of things weren't even an option that they are now. But what happened is, because birth control are hormones and they do impact the body. Hormones are everything, and they impact our brain development. They impact our symptoms, our desires, all of that. The irony on the side effect side was Margaret Sanger was very much wanting sexual liberation and freedom for women. But a lot of women who go on birth control actually have a decrease in sex drive, increase in sex pain. Not every woman, but it is ironic that like our hormones, inherent in hormones in us, are actually what help drive our own sexuality. So when you shut them off, that's also sucky.
Can you explain to people really quickly, because what is it that birth control is mimicking?
Yeah. So birth control, when you're taking those hormones, you are putting them into your system. And basically it's telling your brain, hey, we have a lot of hormones. You don't need to make your own. Some people will liken it similar to pregnancy, but it's different in many ways, because pregnancy has its own like natural, like beneficial rhythms, whereas taking synthetic hormones doesn't have this like natural, beautiful, beneficial piece to it.
There's no pulsing, there's no changing, it's just flatlined.
Correct. And so it's basically turning off your female hormonal system. And extreme people on one end will call it female castration, because that is what it is. You are turning it off. But it is, because when we talk about male birth control, they have talked about turning off testosterone, which is the hormone that drives their sexuality and their fertility, which is the same thing that happens to us as women. We turn off our hormones that drive our sexuality and our fertility. To them, they really do call it male castration, and they will not let it happen.
And nobody is surprised by this information.
Any side effects. There was a male birth control trial that went down, and like just a few participants had a decrease in libido. And so they immediately stopped the trial and they discontinued the progression of that birth control. Women, on the other hand, have struggled with not only low libido, but incredible depression and clots, death, so many deaths. About 300 women a year die from birth control.
Wow.
And people don't talk about that. Just, it completely changes everything about your life.
Because you're not ovulating.
Because you're not ovulating, and you just don't have the beneficial effects that our hormones give us.
In this pulsatile rhythm, the way that, you know, nature, and we're naturopathic doctors, we are very much scientists, medical doctors, but then we look at and respect and have reverence for the way that our natural bodies and circadian rhythms and everything is in a rhythm, seasons in the world and everything. And even just throughout the day in these microcosm of our hormone pulses, there is so much importance there and benefit there. And if the absolute goal is to prevent pregnancy, then you may not really care about this, and that's okay. And it's more beneficial to stop a potential pregnancy from happening. But what we just want people to know is that there is importance for these hormones. And so there's maybe other methods that might work for you, et cetera. And just having the full picture. This is just education.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that this is our whole point of this podcast really is like, people are not told this information, and you can make whatever choice you want. We are very pro medical freedom and medical choice, but just know the whole picture.
Yeah.
And be able to go into it knowing this, because I feel like then it's empowered and you're not being like swindled or manipulated or lied to or
told it's your only option. So I prescribe birth control for some of my patients. We sit down, they know the risks, they know what they're giving up. And sometimes the potential of an accidental pregnancy outweighs any potential side effects. And we do things to mitigate potential side effects.
Yes, that's the other important bit. And what maybe we can get there now or later, but you're also putting your patients on other nutraceutical supplements to combat some of these deficiencies.
Yes. So in my dream world, there's a lot that could happen in my dream world in this topic, but every woman prescribed birth control should also be prescribed a high quality prenatal or multivitamin to replenish the nutrients we know birth control depletes.
Yes.
And so birth control depletes certain nutrients that are absolutely essential for everything. And
give us some examples.
So things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin B12 and folate, zinc, all of these are important for your thyroid, for the production of neurotransmitters that help make you feel happy, for your gut health. Birth control impacts your microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. It impacts us on such a high level. We don't make progesterone, which is the hormone that helps calm our anxiety and helps us sleep. And so there's all of these different things. And so there are ways to mitigate side effects, and a woman should be able to go to her doctor and be told all of the risks, all of the options. And if they sit down together and decide birth control, hormonal birth control is the best choice, and then you say, okay, and here's this pack of all the things that are going to help you optimize. This is the foods you should use, the supplements potentially you should take. This is if there's any red flags, if you notice any of these symptoms right away, come back in and let's like change something.
Talk about it.
Versus typically women get depressed and then they just get put on an antidepressant, which is completely worsening the situation. And so we could do even birth control better.
Oh yeah. And even it's really upsetting to how many pregnancies that I even know of that happened in high school and college from women not being told, if you take a round of antibiotics, your birth control pill is going to be less effective.
Yeah.
Or you cannot smoke cigarettes, or if you do, I guess you can do whatever you want, but
you might die.
Yeah, if you do, your clotting risk is so much higher. There's just little things. These are medications. They're not benign, just substances that we're putting in our body. And there are just little nuances that we need to know so that, we can do birth control better. Like you said, I love that. I think that's because we're not saying that nobody should do it. Just know so that you can do it better.
Yeah.
And that's so empowering.
And just having the whole spectrum. And with everything that we talk about, there are historical pressures, there are cultural pressures, and birth control, hormonal birth control is one of the top grossing medications for the pharmaceutical industry because the majority of women in the world are on them.
Yes.
And they really needed to convince women to take a drug every day, which is a huge commitment to get someone to take a pharmaceutical every single day. And so they really had a ton of money in campaigning to convince the world that they aren't drugs and that they are beautiful and they're Vogue and they're like, here's your beautiful circular pink and it's like candy. And it's just, there's been a lot of marketing push, just like in the diamond movement to push. That's a whole other conversation.
Diamond? You mean like literally diamonds?
Yeah. To convince people that they need diamonds in their rings. That was very new and all from a marketing platform. But anyways,
fascinating.
Yeah, that's a whole topic.
You'll never know.
But then what they discovered was some women were showing benefits from birth control. So once they started putting women on them for contraception, obviously pregnancies were going down, which the birth control was introduced right in that like baby boomer time when there was a ton of babies being born.
Yes.
And we were right into that like wave of feminism. Women were wanting to go into the workplace, and birth control did allow for that, which is great. And every movement of feminism has been important and has played its role.
Absolutely.
And there have been pros and cons to it. And we need to continue to evolve as women and as a culture with the new information and ways of the world. And yes, it allowed for women to go to work. And then women were noticing the side effects that weren't really being talked about, swept under the rug, but also benefits like women's acne going away, or maybe they had irregular cycles and they were put on the pill and then they thought they were having regular periods, which
more predictable period bleeds.
But what a period is when you're on hormonal birth control is just a medical withdrawal bleed.
Right.
So basically you're taking pills and then there is a placebo week where you can still take the pill, but there's nothing in it. And so that's when your body sheds the lining. So women will tell me all the time, they're like, oh, I had really regular periods when I was on birth control. They were just medically managed periods. They weren't true periods in the sense of how our physiology does it. And what happened was we created a culture in our medical system and in our culture at large that birth control solves hormonal problems. The problem with that is it doesn't solve hormonal problems. It covers them up.
Yes.
And it doesn't get to the root cause. And why this is important is one, because we still aren't getting to the root cause of an imbalance. And two, because that does women a disservice who do eventually want to be mothers.
Yes.
Because to give you like a framework, let's say you have irregular cycles and acne. This is super common and classic. A woman in her teenage years goes to the doctor, whether she's sexually active or not, most likely her doctor will put her on the pill.
Really quick side note, I remember begging my mom to go on the pill because all my friends were on the pill. I was not sexually active, but I really wanted bigger boobs. And I noticed because of the synthetic hormone.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like, I don't know, I had my period, but I wasn't just developed. I was a late bloomer.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, I want that.
Yeah,
and everyone else is on this thing.
Yeah.
And what is this? I want to be on it. Anyway, okay,
yeah, no, it's very trendy. It's very expected at some point. If you're not on birth control, it's like,
almost like
what?
you're weird.
Yeah, who are you? And again, that's very much culture that has been driven by the industry. But anyways, let's say you have acne and irregular cycles. You're just not getting your period very regularly. They will put you on the pill, whether you're sexually active or not. And so we are using birth control as a hormonal prescription.
Right.
And all of a sudden the woman's like, oh my gosh, my acne is getting better. I have regular periods, which are just medical withdrawal bleeds. However, the things that were in place in that woman's life that led to acne and irregular cycles to begin with were most likely a PCOS pattern, high testosterone or androgens that could indicate an adrenal issue or some other ovarian issue. Most likely a metabolic issue with blood sugar balance, potentially inflammation, potentially a gut microbiome issue from the foods they're eating, toxins that she's being exposed to.
Lack of exercise.
And because none of those were being addressed and they just put her on the pill, which took away the symptoms, it's like an alarm is going off in a fire. And it's annoying. Acne is that like me. It's like this very annoying and shut up.
Yeah.
And so you just unplug or take the batteries out of the fire alarm and you're like, oh, thank God. The beeping has stopped. The acne is gone. Thank God we solved the problem. Yet the fire is still raging.
Yes.
And that fire is still raging inside of that woman. All of the pieces that were there leading to those symptoms, which are intelligent. Our body is intelligent. Symptoms are our body's language talking to us, telling us something's wrong.
Right.
And we see them or we experience them in our experience of ourselves to get our attention, to pay attention to something that's happening deeper. So when we just unplug the fire alarm and don't address the fire, that woman then goes through her entire teenage years, 20s, maybe even into her early 30s, and then meets the love of her life and says, I'm ready to have a baby. And her doctor says, oh, just stop the pill and you'll get pregnant. So she believes them. Yep. There's no prior prep or concern about anything. She's been on almost 2 decades of nutrient depletion, microbiome imbalance, and all the other underlying factors were still happening. Then she pulls the pill expecting to just get pregnant and finds out she has raging PCOS. She cannot get pregnant. Her health is absolutely in shambles. Her acne comes raging back. She has 0 regular cycles. And now she goes down this whole long journey of infertility, still not being addressed with her health because the fertility system doesn't address her underlying health, is pushed into IVF, maybe has a few failed cycles. And even if she does become pregnant, still has metabolic issues that eventually turn into heart disease or diabetes.
Gosh. Yeah, that sucks.
That's not how it should be. And there's a better way.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's not that the pill is evil or that we shouldn't use it.
But it's been a misunderstanding. We've been told something that is not the complete truth.
And it's just not, it shouldn't be used as a Band-Aid for that reason.
Exactly. It's almost like as if you had ankle pain, just took ibuprofen every single day. Yeah. For 10 years. And then you were like, oh, but I want to run a marathon now. So I can't be on these medications for any reason. So you stop it. Mm-hmm. You thought that ibuprofen, your ankle pain was cured. Right. And then now you're going to run the marathon, you stop the medication and you're like, oh my gosh, I am absolutely nowhere because you've just been masking the symptoms. Exactly. And that's what women who've been on birth control who try to become pregnant, if they have underlying factors, have. And it doesn't mean every woman who's put on birth control will not get pregnant or that they have an issue. There's so many.
It's all about what's underlying it all. Yep. And there are things like that same scenario. That woman could have gone to the doctor and been put on birth control, but they also could have addressed all these underlying factors. Mm-hmm. And when she went to get off the pill, would be in a much better place, become pregnant, and just for her own overall health. And so most women who come to me have been told at some point in their life that they need to go on the pill for whatever hormonal imbalance they have, whether it's painful periods, irregular periods, acne, mood issues, depression, heavy periods, low libido, high libido, like any woman issue, truly, they are almost always offered the pill.
Yeah.
And it is not a cure-all. Yeah. You are not addressing the underlying factors that are contributing to those. They don't see symptoms as intelligent and wise. They see them as a nuisance that needs to be covered up.
Yeah.
And the pill does a very good job of that.
It's such a facade.
It is. And it's sad. And it's, again, I say this to my patients all the time. Things in the world are not inherently good or bad necessarily. Like alcohol is not evil, but it's why you drink it, how you drink it. A person having a cocktail with friends at the height of their like happiest day at a wedding or whatever is very different than drinking alcohol because you're depressed at home and you're trying to self-medicate a neurotransmitter imbalance.
Yes.
It's not alcohol that's the issue. It's why it's being used.
Exactly.
And birth control is the same. It's not inherently evil or bad. And there are risks and side effects, like with every medication, but it's how it's being used. And that's the beef I have with birth control, and how we could be doing it different and better, and helping women to just understand that picture and that they have other choices.
Yes, that's the main thing. It's like presented as the only option.
It's presented as the only option, not only for contraception, but for
Any health
female. Whereas
so easy. Just take
so
this.
easy.
You have any problem here?
Yeah. And it is easy. You, as a doctor, I know we function outside of the insurance model on purpose, because the insurance model forces doctors to have very little time with patients.
Yep.
And they want to be able to help them. And in their mind, they're helping that woman. Oh my God, your acne got better.
Exactly.
I'm such a good doctor.
And it's okay. You know what? That's one way to go about it. Again, if you're going to just be on birth control because you're wanting to prevent pregnancy or whatever it is, do these other things so that you're healthy with it. And, you can continue. There are some benefits, long-term studies that are showing less cancer risk and different things like that because of the lack of this pulsatile estrogen type picture or whatever. And so there's no time and place for these, like even long-term stints. It's just, maybe it would be better to not be on it for a period of time and get into an optimal state of health, because it's going to be even hard, even if you are addressing those metabolic or adrenal or nutritional deficiencies that are underlying some of your problems. It's going to be difficult to tell that you're improving because you're still in this like masked symptom state, correct?
Yes, exactly. So sometimes I'll tell my patients, even if maybe they're in between partners and they maybe know that becoming pregnant is really not on their mind right now, but let's still just take a break from birth control.
Yep.
And just see how your body naturally is. Let's ask it the questions. Have your body talk to us and say, what's going on? Do you have pain in your periods? Do you have irregular cycles? Do you have acne? How's your libido? A lot of women have a libido issue being on the pill. And we need to take a break from that and see, was it the pill or is it your relationship?
Oh my gosh.
Or is it your own trauma or whatever? And so we just can't it's really hard to get to optimal health when on it, when nothing else has been addressed. And there is a time and a place. I worked with patients who have severe endometriosis, and maybe they have a factor in their life. Like one of my patients is in grad school and she really needs to finish grad school. She's very stressed. We've worked on all of her stress management. We've worked on all of the things, her gut microbiome, her diet, all of these different factors. And for her, she has a genetic pattern and she has an issue with stress that flares her endo. And for her to literally survive and get through grad school, birth control is the best option for her.
Totally. And that's a beautiful usage.
And it's a beautiful use.
Yes.
And she's on a great multivitamin to replenish all of her nutrients. Yep. She feels better than she ever was before she came in. And like, I feel very comfortable prescribing that for her.
Yep. It's the full picture.
Yeah. And so I said, there's a time and a place. And I think what women just need to understand is this whole picture, like with everything. We've talked about this with birth and with breastfeeding and getting pregnant. We just need to be like given a catalog as women.
Yeah.
Here's the stage you're at. Here are all your choices and options.
Yep.
And pick the one that resonates the most with you. And if there's one that has a risk, because it's not without risk to be off birth control
either,
and tracking your cycle.
Totally.
There is a risk that you may get pregnant. Yep. And you need to understand that risk, just like you need to understand the risk of being on birth control. And that if you have a family history of clots and you're a smoker,
for
you might die. And you should know that. Most women have no idea that could be a risk.
And see, this is the problem with the insurance model. And we're just calling for a change because it's clearly not working. But the doctors don't have time to do all this.
No, they don't.
And we've already just even talked about things that they would have fit 3 patients in this time period. And that's messed up. It's not that the doctors want to spend no time with you. Would love to probably spend more time with patients, but they literally don't have time. Yeah. So it's okay. You can choose from Depo-Provera or whatever. And this is the option. And then and also in addition to that, has been an overall lack of, in the conventional model, a lack of recognition of these other factors that we're talking about, which is the nutrient depletion, the microbiome impact. But it is very clear now in the research that this is happening. So it's not like that is not up for argument. It's a clear pattern.
Very clear.
So we need to be having the education that's sometimes not trickling down to these OB-GYN offices or whatever it is. And we're here to sound the alarm.
Maybe it's not the role for the doctor. We are naturopathic doctors. Docere is one of our biggest principles where we are doctor as teacher. Doctor literally means teacher in Latin. However, if things can't shift in that model, let's say in the near term, how can we create a different system? Maybe it's moving it into the school system. I personally think every woman, when she turns like 14, year-long course
on how to track your
class,
cycle.
just learning about herself as a body, her
Yeah.
hormones, how to track her cycle, how to prevent pregnancy once she becomes pregnant, what to do about it. Could you imagine how to eat, how to have self-talk, like the things that would change?
Oh, yeah.
One course. I remember the amount of times I spent on calculus, literature, reading
Totally.
worthless books that did nothing for me in my life.
Or learning those calculus topics that are like, this is not, if you're going to be using this every day in your job for some reason, you're going to be getting so much more training.
Totally.
Yeah,
That's a higher
course.
level thing that should only be done if you choose to be an engineer.
Right.
And every woman should get this.
100%. It should be also, just to bring it back real quick, on a plug, and we'll have another episode about this, but a little girl between like 9 and 14 is probably the average age of getting your cycle, and it's becoming earlier and earlier as well. But this should be a celebration.
Yes.
A menstruation celebration of a rite of passage of coming to being into a woman and having it strip away that like gross or scary or yucky or whatever, or, oh, you got your period now, just get on birth control. Imagine all the 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds that are on birth control.
Oh, I know.
And this is such an empowering tool for us to know and understand so that we are not like manipulated, swindled into the system. And of course, accidents can still happen in terms of getting accidental pregnancy, but so many women are walking around I wouldn't have known had I not gone to medical school.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to go to medical school to understand when we're ovulating. It's
exactly.
so silly.
It is so silly. And that's so frustrating. And there is another subculture of our culture who does see the inherentness of women as icky and gross and annoying. And there is a culture of people who feel like we should just abolish our periods.
It's because we're hard to control. And
Yes.
this comes back to birth as well.
Mhm.
It's because so many aspects of femininity or being female in general, and then that sort of feminine energy, meaning like the fluid, the creative, what's the yin, whereas the yang is the masculine, which is the lines and logic and numbers and patterns.
Deadlines. You have a talk at work, the masculine can show up because he's consistent, and a woman might be cycling.
Might be cycling,
and that
or
isn't good
pregnant,
for the CEO of the company.
Exactly. So it's a way to control us in this masculine world. And sometimes we need that, or in periods of time throughout history, we've needed that to adapt. And it's just, I think that the future is more feminine. It's like, how can we back this? It's okay to have these cycles. It's okay to take mental health days. It's okay to know that when you're on your cycle, you are likely to be more tired. And this is physiological. This is not, just buck up and get over it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
If a man had gone through even a fraction of what women go through, they would be like,
they would be like,
God.
This is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And yet we're just supposed to act like it doesn't matter. And it does. And we recognize
play in that same world, but
and it's beautiful. Exactly. We're not the same. And it's a beautiful flow and cycle. And a book that's really good that goes along with this is called The Red Tent. And I love it's the way in traditional cultures, the women would all get their periods with the new moon, or bleed on the new moon for those dark days. Yeah. And they would ovulate with the full moon.
Because the sun impacts the pituitary gland, or the moon.
The moon. And the moon has this pull on us, and it's so cool that we're so connected to that. I think that's a beautiful rhythm. But they would prepare, because all of the women in the little village area would cycle together. And that does happen. We may cycle now together from being together so much. And that's cool in and of itself, but they would prepare for those days, their role in the food prep or taking care of the children or whatever it was, so that in those days that they were bleeding, they could rest. And that there was like a pause to it. They would rest, and then they would come back. Many other animal species don't bleed every month. There's dogs will have heat cycles that are every couple months or whatever. But we could even look to animal models of the way that they behave around this time is really different. Yeah. And we just are trying to crush ourselves in this society that's like, there's no change, everything's the same. You cannot, and I don't know, that it's obviously it can have ripple effects and lasting effects. And we want there to be like an empowerment aspect to this.
Yeah. And for anyone who wants that more organized, I do have a course called Moon Medicine on this, where I talk about that. And I talk about all the different phases of the cycle and what you should be doing, what you should be eating. And I have a red tent ceremony guide. And then I also have a cycle tracking course if you want to understand about your cycle, and a breaking up with birth control course. So lots of resources for you. If you're like, oh, you're identifying all the problems, what do we do about it? We do have resources.
Yeah. And this is your wheelhouse. Like the Moon Medicine course also talks about those sorts of mental, emotional things I was touching on, about how like when you may be more creative, when you may be more having like introspective downloads, or when you may be involuting back on yourself, and this pulsatile nature, which is tough to work into modern society, but how can we use it, or at least understand it, can benefit from it?
Yeah. And if you do choose to be on birth control, those are lessened, and just like understanding that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So to wrap up this episode, the biggest thing I want you to take away is birth control has been an important tool in our culture. Yeah. And there is a time and a place for it. However, it should not, in my opinion, be used as a cure-all for all women's health issues. No. Sometimes we do use it as a hormonal band-aid, and that's okay and appropriate. And many times it's not. And for any woman who wants to become pregnant, later, especially, this should be addressed and looked at. And we should not be feeding women the idea that there's no risk, it's fine, just take it forever, you will get pregnant. And it's just doing everyone a disservice. And the only people winning really in that regard is the pharmaceutical industry, and not women in general. And so I know a lot of women get very upset when anyone speaks out against birth control because they feel it's anti-woman. And I really urge all of those people to think, is it really anti-woman?
Yes.
To be not supporting the women
and our health
issues.
Yes. And if preventing pregnancy is the main cause or reason of wanting to take birth control, that is fine as well. There are other ways you could do it as well. But if you are on birth control to prevent pregnancy, or for whatever reason, and then maybe you're with your partner and you're looking into wanting to get pregnant, when would you say is a good time to get off of it so that they can begin to see what is their cycle like and optimize those factors?
So I have a slightly different approach than maybe other doctors. I'm a fan of optimizing as much as you can before you pull the pill.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah. So I recommend to work on your diet, get your lifestyle in gear, get the supplementation on board to replenish yourself, work on your microbiome as much as you can, make sure that all of these places are in place. Do the education now to understand what your cycle should be like and what it's doing. Because if you pull the pill and then try to change your diet, change your lifestyle, just get on the supplements, try to learn about your cycle.
It's going to be hard.
It's so overwhelming.
Process. Yeah.
And if you don't know, and now you don't have a contraception, the likelihood of you getting accidentally pregnant and your system's all messed up and you're trying to get off of birth control in the first place, it's a lot. So I like to take my patients through a stepwise fashion so that they can digest each kind of fact, each section of really getting that under their belt, like really understanding blood sugar and making sure that they really know how to eat a solid breakfast.
Yeah. And making it a habit.
And making it a habit and changing your lifestyle so that by the time you pull the pill, you've most likely addressed most of the underlying factors that would cause you to have problems post-pill.
Yeah, so that you're not having this drop off.
Yes, where it's just
syndrome,
like a panic, because a lot of women will just stop the pill cold turkey. And then they feel so horrible. Their acne comes raging back. Their painful periods are debilitating. And then they're like, see, birth control, I need to go back on it.
I can't do this. Yeah.
Yet a lot of those factors could have been addressed before: the inflammation, the diet, the nutrients. And so do as much as you can. Then when you feel ready, pull the pill, and then work on optimizing any of those factors. So I would say for me, minimum 3 months between pulling the pill and getting pregnant, that would be my recommendation, because it takes the body about 3 months to resync its hormonal situation.
Got it.
Women can get pregnant the month after stopping birth control. I personally just don't think that's optimal if you have the chance. So then I would use condoms or some other barrier method during that time.
Yes.
While you're learning your cycle, while you're starting to track your ovulation.
And allowing it to come back, because it may take months. You may pull the pill and not have a period for months, because it takes those steroid hormones, those synthetic steroid hormones, months and months to clear out of the body, especially if your detox pathways are gunked up or your lifestyle factors, you're inflamed, et cetera. They can hang out in the system for a little bit longer.
They can hang out, or the pituitary gland, like the half-life of birth control isn't too long. It's not that they'll be in your system forever, but that the hormonal birth control has shut down your brain factory of hormones. And that is what can take a really long time to get turned back on, because it's like walking into an abandoned factory and being like, turn the lights on, let's all just get back to work. And it's like rusty and it's like not really working.
Need oil.
But there are things you can do before you pull the pill to ensure that's maybe more optimized. So before you turn on the lights of the factory, you maybe go in and clean the rest off, and maybe you hire a lot of good staff members before you tell everyone we're opening the factory again.
I love that.
So that when you walk in to turn the lights onto the factory, it's not a shit show.
Yeah.
Everything goes pretty well. There will be issues. Oh, Clark didn't know about the box that came through the mail. Yeah. But it's not like the entire factory is completely solidified with rust and we are having a panic and people are expecting us to be up and running.
And it just will improve your experience of this whole situation. So would you say maybe like doing that like before you stop birth control, before you pull the pill, maybe doing these health optimization factors for 3 months?
Yeah. So I like in my program, it's 12 weeks. So 3 months of learning, prepping, and doing all of the lifestyle shifts and changes, getting on a good supplement routine, helping your detox pathways and replenishing your nutrients. So about 3 months, stop the pill, and then take about 3 months off the pill and then get pregnant. I recognize that's 6 months.
Yeah.
But my dream is to get to people who we just got married and we want to get pregnant in about 6 months. Perfect.
Perfect.
And if you like absolutely must be pregnant in a month
Before.
or two, do the best you can. And some people already know a lot of things about diet and things like that. So I would say once you feel confident in the lifestyle pieces and you've replenished the nutrients and stuff. So my dream situation would be a 6 months, 3 on the pill, optimizing, 3 off the pill, knowing you could accidentally get pregnant at any moment and being prepared. I have had patients who they loved it. They were stoked because they want pregnancy, but
that's a thing.
2
That's
months,
a risk.
2 months in and they weren't quite ready. Like they were thinking maybe a year down the line. So people need to understand there is a chance that you will get pregnant, especially if you've done this prep work ahead of time.
Because
very
your body
fertile.
is healthier, which is a good thing. We want this health or fertility as a baseline. And then just last question to wrap up, because there are these women who are, or I guess a clarifying statement in question is there are women who are on birth control. They're with a long-term partner. They're wanting to have a baby at some point, and they're just maybe getting freaked out about how the infertility rates are rising and they're wanting to do things now to optimize. Would you say that this birth control, breaking up with the birth control course would be the most appropriate thing for them in getting ready and optimizing their baby just for that sort of preventing these infertility issues, or do you think it's not connected, or what?
Absolutely. I think the baseline of health is the same, whether you have hormonal imbalance, infertility, mood issues, like the underlying factors are all really similar and need to be addressed and optimized. If you address and optimize the things that are going to make it easy for you to get off birth control, you've done a lot of the same things that is going to optimize you being able to get pregnant. But like in my course or any thing that you do to look into that, the steps that you take and the things that you do to help that is the exact same thing that you want to do to prepare for pregnancy.
Perfect.
Outside of like sperm and egg optimization, there's that it still is like on an underlying factor, like
it's
diet,
building
lifestyle.
The garden.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's nourishing the soil.
Yes.
And whenever you're ready to plant that,
we love metaphors.
We do. Really cultivating the soil is what takes
so true though. And I think people can really understand and grasp that. And we have a preconceptive episode. We have an episode on deeper infertility issues as well. So search the podcast for that. But being able to think about your body and your uterus specifically as this garden that's literally going to grow your baby is honestly true. It's not even that far removed.
It is not.
And what do we need to put in the system so that it can grow? That could be things like conventionally, like fertilizers or whatever. Your soil needs to have the right
nutrients,
minerals and things so that the plant can grow. And then what kind of things do you want to take out, like pulling the weeds?
Yeah.
So detoxing,
pulling the weeds and not putting pesticides and herbicides, getting the toxins out.
Getting the toxins out. Yes. Reducing your exposure to any further toxins, detoxing and getting the things out so that it can be this flourishing, and then you're watering it and taking care of the daily steps.
Yeah.
And you guys, like, this isn't a super passive process. It's very involved.
Yeah.
But it's also your health.
I don't know anything about compost. It's all about the microbiome of the soil, and our bodies are exactly the same. We are gardens, and it is 100%.
And it takes time. It's not overnight. Seed does not become a full-on gardenia overnight.
It does not.
I wish that was a gardenia.
And soil doesn't either. You see really dead, dry,
our topsoil
soil
anywhere in America right now.
Yeah, exactly. It takes a while to nourish that. And so that's really what I encourage. And I hope that we can shift the culture of women and our health system of women should always be conscious of and cognizant of how are they optimizing their soil? And if birth control is a factor,
you can further optimize that.
How do you continue to optimize with that piece there? And so I think
100%. Thank you so much. This is so awesome. And Dr. Leah has so many resources on womanhoodwellness.com. And it's like, this is humongous information for people because I think that it's pretty revolutionary and not many people are talking about it, which is why we are talking about it. So thank you so much for your experience with this and your expertise. And this has been really awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy as a Mother podcast.
In order for other women to hear this information, please leave a review with Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and send to a friend who could benefit from this content.
We're so excited to share more on becoming and being a mother next time. And remember, a healthier future starts now, and it starts with you.